Aloha, this is Noelle Kahanu of Bishop Museum. The following panel presentation took place on Saturday, April 6, 2013, and was part of a series of presentations offered in conjunction with the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition American Heroes, World War II Nisei Soldiers, and the Congressional Gold Medal. Moderated by Carole Hayashino, President and Executive Director of the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii, the panel explored Hawaii's internment and role in the legislative campaign for redress. The presentation was preceded by the screening of a brand new film, The Untold Story, The Internment of Japanese Americans in Hawaii.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Noelle, the Bishop Museum, Go for Broke, and the National Veterans Network for including the Japanese Cultural Center in this wonderful celebration and tribute to our World War II Nisei veterans, our heroes of World War II. Along with the Nisei veterans, there is another story that needs to be shared, and that is the story of Japanese and Japanese Americans in Hawaii who were interned in Hawaii's confinement sites. Now, while there is much information on the internment camps that existed on the mainland, on the continental U.S., Manzanar, Tule Lake, people are familiar with those names. People are not familiar with the confinement sites like Honolulu or Sand Island or the Kalaheo Stockades. It is for that reason the Japanese Cultural Center years ago embarked on a project to research Hawaii's confinement sites and the unique history of the internment of Japanese in Hawaii. The Untold Story, the film you are to see, you're going to see the classroom version of the full-length documentary, and this is the first feature-length documentary on the subject. You'll see a 30-minute version, as I said, and immediately following the film, there'll be a panel discussion with Ryan Kawamoto, our filmmaker, our director, Jane Kurahara, our staff associate, Brian Niiya, who is a former program director and currently with Densho, and Bill Kaneko, the former president of the Honolulu JACL. And we'll talk further about the experience of Japanese during World War II in Hawaii and Hawaii's unique role in the 1980 legislative campaign for redress and reparations. Enjoy the film. Joining me for the panel discussion, Ryan Kawamoto, filmmaker, director, writer. Yay. Staff associate, Jane Kurahara. Bill Kaneko, the Honolulu former JACL president. Hi, Bill. And Brian Niiya, former program director of the Japanese Cultural Center, currently with Densho. So we always like to do this kind of informal Q&A after our film, and also provide an opportunity for members of the audience to ask whatever questions they wish as well. But I'm going to start it off with some questions, and I want to start with Jane. Jane is actually is a volunteer at the Japanese Cultural Center, and you know, Jane, I want to start because you've done a lot of research on Hawaii's confinement sites in Honolulu and so on. And in the film, there's a comment. Gary Okihiro makes a comment that the Nisei vets, had to prove their loyalty on the battlefields. And in another sense, I think what we have come to find are that many of the internees prove their loyalty by going to camp, to the confinement site camp. And I just wanted to invite you to make a comment on that, because I know the stories of the internees and the Nisei vets are kind of interrelated.
Yes, in doing our research, we from the Soichi Obata family, there came this beautiful photo of a Nisei soldier visiting his father in internment camp. And it's such a poignant picture. And then I started to read about the connection between, I wonder how many fathers had Nisei sons that were in the 44200th, and it turns out the figure is over 160 fathers, which is over 10% of the internees from Hawaii.
And since you do have the mic, one other question, Jane, because it's in the documentary, but not in this version. How did you come to find Honouliuli?
We came to find it because we were feeling incompetent in the resource center. KHNL, the TV station, wanted to air the movie Schindler's List, and that's all about the Jewish Holocaust. And before they did, they wanted to air something about the local situation. So they called us and they said, where exactly is Honouliuli internment camp? And to our consternation, we could not help them. We found people who said, it's over there. We found people who said, no, it's over there. But more people said, I didn't know Hawaii had internment camps, or I didn't know there was a camp in Honouliuli. And so that's how we got started. And all we wanted to do, first of all, was just find it, because we said, if anyone ever asks us again, we should know.
So it really was a forgotten story.
Yes, definitely.
So it was over 10 years ago that phone call came to the Japanese Cultural Center, and it led on the adventure. Jane and Betsy and others at the Japanese Cultural Center began to do more and more research on Honouliuli and Hawaii's confinement sites. Then a few years ago, with the help of the National Park, the Japanese American Confinement Site Grant Program, that the Japanese Cultural Center was funded to produce this film, The Untold Story. We were very fortunate to meet and hire Ryan Kawamoto, our local filmmaker, director, writer, who put together this wonderful documentary for us. So with Ryan, my first question to Ryan is always, tell us about the challenge in making this film.
Well, one of the main challenges of this film was that it is primarily an Issei story. Issei is first generation. I am a Yonsei, fourth generation. And Yonseis like myself cannot really speak or write Japanese very well. And many of the oral histories were originally written in Japanese. And only until recently, in the last 5 years or so, were they translated into English by the volunteers at the Japanese Cultural Center's Resource Center. I was able to access them. And of course, the survivors have long since passed. So what we did was we reenacted a lot of the historical scenes directly from the oral histories of Yasutaro Soga and Otokichi Ozaki. You can actually purchase those books today if you'd like to know more.
Available at the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii gift shop.
I got my plug-in today.
Thank you,
and,
Ryan.
But basically, we took those exact oral histories and we reenacted them. It was one of the greatest challenges of the film, but I think it also makes the film much more real to the audiences watching today. And so that is what you see on screen.
And then it was supplemented with many other oral histories and photos that you could find.
And we were able to interview a few of the Nisei or Kibe Nisei survivors. Unfortunately, most have passed away now who are now appear in this film.
You know, Bill, along with this, what I'm reminded is Hawaii was very unique, and while they were Japanese in Hawaii were not interned in mass like on the mainland, but here the stories of Hawaii's internees are very, very unique from any other place. And just like Honouliuli wasn't discovered until, say, the 1990s or so, the story of many of the Hawaii evacuees was unknown until the 1980s, until the passage of redress, the late 1980s. Can you share some of those stories and how you came about learning about that history?
Actually, the focus of the film is really on the 13 internment sites throughout the state. But what's really not told is that in addition to the 13 internment site, there are 23 affected sites throughout the state where Japanese Americans were not interned but were displaced and evacuated.
So meaning what? Displaced? Like were they selectively picked?
Same situation. Because of their Japanese ancestry, they were living in places like Waiau, in Kahuku near the airstrip, on Paoa Valley where there was a military gunnery site there. There are 23 impacted sites throughout the state. comprising of some 2,000 plus Japanese Americans. And by reasons of race, because they were located and lived within key military destinations, the U.S. military came in at gunpoint without any due process and kicked them out.
So forced them out of their homes.
Forced them out. Same situations. They were told that they could not live in their homes. They were forced to live with relatives and friends. There was one family that we met was living in a chicken coop for a year and a half. I mean, there's literally hundreds of these stories where Japanese Americans, similar situation, but in this case, they were not interned, but evacuated, but lost their
And it's
civil
simply
rights.
because of race?
Purely because of race. And that the United States government, the Department of Justice, ultimately ruled that because of their Japanese ancestry, they were discriminated and also were able to receive compensation for those illegal acts.
Because when the redress bill was actually passed in 1988, it did not include that class.
The redress bill was kind of a broadly worded bill that was targeted for internment camp internees, but because the language was broad enough, we were able to get redress for these 2,000 Japanese Americans.
So there were about 2,000 evacuees, and there were over 2,000 internees who were actually picked up and detained in one of the 13 confinement sites.
That's correct.
Brian, I know you've done a lot of research on this in this area on this subject, and we've been talking about the differences, the uniqueness of what happened here in 1942. But can you comment a little bit about the similarities and the differences between what happened on the mainland and what happened here?
Well, I think fundamentally the main difference is on the West Coast, it was every single person of Japanese descent. So it's like 120,000 people versus, depending on how you count, 1,000 to a little over 2,000 in Hawaii. So the magnitude is just fundamentally different. The authority was fundamentally different. The famed infamous Executive Order 9066 really, not that it didn't apply, but the people in Hawaii were largely not arrested under the authority of 9066. It was martial law. It was the Alien Enemy Act of 1798, and it was selective. So it was
So
a
the
fundamentally
circumstances
different
are a
thing.
little different. It's
Yeah.
under martial law, which
Right.
is very different. Martial law was never declared on the West Coast.
Right. And then, we should also point out that a parallel thing happened on the mainland, where right after December 7, you had a similar number of Issei community leaders who were also arrested, right after Pearl Harbor. But in that case, most of them actually then ended up in the same War Relocation Authority administered concentration
But
camps
some of
on
the,
mainland.
the Issei leaders in California, Oregon, and Washington were eventually sent to a Department of Justice internment
Yes,
camp. So is
correct.
Honolulu closer to a Department of Justice camp?
It's a kind of a complicated story, but the Issei generally who were captured in Hawaii, held at these various camps on the different islands, kind of brought to Sand Island over time, and from Sand Island shipped off to camps generally run by the Army on the continental U.S. Honolulu came into play later in March or so, 43, and it was largely the Japanese who were housed there, local Japanese who were housed there, most were Nisei or Kibe, in part because they couldn't send them to the mainland because they didn't have the legal authority to do that. So Honolulu was in some way set up for that population.
Why, in your opinion, then, is it so difficult to get information on Hawaii's confinement sites? Unlike Department of Justice,
Right.
I mean, there's more and more information available from the government. There are stories from from Manzanar, Tule Lake. We're becoming more and more familiar with camp stories. Why has it been so difficult here?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I think one is just the sheer number. You compare Manzanar to Honolulu. I mean, there are 10,000 people at Manzanar. Many of them are still alive or were still alive in the 80s and 90s and are still alive today. All their descendants, I mean, it's an enormous population. Honolulu maximum population was 300 or so, not even 300. So part of it is that. Part of it is just the consciousness. I think one of the Nishimura daughters mentioned this notion of because there were selective internment, there was this stigma that a lot of them faced coming after the war. And on the mainland, while many people didn't talk about it for the first 20 or 30 years after the war, it was more of a collective thing. And so when people started to talk about it, kind of the floodgates opened in the 1980s. And I think here, and my own family was an internee family too, there was a real reluctance because there was this sense that, this feeling that because there was only certain people who were interned, that there was still the sense that people felt like, wow, there must have done something wrong.
They must have done something wrong. But on the other hand, the internees in California or the mainland did not talk about what happened to them for decades.
For good 30
because it was
years.
very painful. Bill, I'm wondering, did you come across this during the redress campaign during the 1980s? Did you have a sense that it was difficult to get the stories, capture these stories?
Oh, most definitely. I think a lot of families really had not, shared this experience. It was really until the Commission on Wartime Relocation was convened, where the United States Congress did a fact-finding activity, and led by then University of Hawaii professor Franklin Odo and Earl Nishimura, who was then president of the Japanese American Citizens League, led a delegation up to Seattle, where there was hearings that for the first time really, not only nationally but locally, told the story of the Japanese American intern experience. And I think it was that catalyst and that activity that began the dialogue that was not only essential for our learning as a community, but the healing in many of the families.
Jane, can you tell us about some of the ongoing efforts, the JCCH's efforts now to preserve the story, to preserve the sites, but also tell the story?
We've been very fortunate to receive several grants from the Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant Program, and we've kind of concentrated a lot on eventually getting it into our educational program, because we feel that that's part of our mission, that we're supposed to be preserving our legacy about the Japanese in Hawaii for present and future generations. And this particular story has so much relevance to today because the bottom line is discrimination and prejudice. It also helps the young people to react more sensitively to, like, the 9/11 situation and the Muslim Americans. It also helps them to see the connection to the playground where we all went to school, and at recess there was always one kid that you said, "Ooh, don't play with him, he's got cooties." And so, we all remember that, and we thought it was kind of harmless, but it's really a small way of starting the discrimination. And so right now, actually next Saturday, 11 of our high schools who participated in our project this year will be presenting their projects. They learned about World War II because it's in their requirements in high school. We sent them either to Pearl Harbor or to Honolulu, and then they took what they learned from those experiences, and they are trying to come up with projects that connect either with a current social justice issue or with historic preservation or a conflict of resources. We've heard from a few of them a little bit about what they're doing. Sacred Hearts Academy, which is a girls' school. St. Andrew's Priory, which is also a girls' school. They're concentrating on the homeless female veterans. They're seeing that connection there. Sacred Hearts is seeing a connection to girls' education worldwide. In other countries, the girls are not so fortunate. And so they're selling wristbands. And with the wristband, they found an organization that will match what they sell it for 4 times over. And all this money they're going to send to a secondary girls' school in Tanzania. So these are the kinds of things they're understanding it's even going beyond their school. We thought a lot of them would end up with bullying or something like that, but they're really going out into the community, into the world, and seeing the connection.
So that program, inspired by history, the Youth Take Action, Hawaii's Youth Take Action, will be held at the Japanese Cultural Center next Saturday, 9:30 in the morning, and it's open to the public. And these students have been working for the past semester learning about the history of Japanese Americans during World War II and have made that history relevant to their lives today and are moving, as James has described, paying it forward, trying to learn from history and helping others. So that's been a wonderful program. Good work, Jane. And in addition to working in the schools and education, the Japanese Cultural Center continues to be involved in preserving Honolulu and Hawaii's confinement sites. Honolulu currently is privately owned. The National Park Service is conducting a special resource study to see if it fits into the national park system. And hopefully that will be done. We're hopeful that the study will be completed by fall of this year. And if that does happen, and it's a positive recommendation, we will see Honolulu preserved as part of the national park system. Ryan, the story continues. I know we continue to uncover new stories, and more research on the confinement sites. You want to share with the group?
Sure. The full-length documentary was actually completed back in October when we premiered it. But since then, more information has come forward. Some of that information has led us to actually locate or be closer to really locating the Kalaheo Stockade location on Kauai. We've uncovered new oral history as well as some other information that's pointing us in that direction. And just about 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were in Hilo showing the film there, new information surfaced about one of the other camps, Waiakea Prison, which the location is still unknown, but we have some new leads on that and other information. So more information continues to come forward, and we hope that by showing this film and dialoguing this film with you, you will share your stories with us, and hopefully we will learn all we can learn about this.
I think that's very important. When we show this film, and we've had an opportunity to show this film, the full-length documentary, 6 times in Honolulu. We've taken it to Kauai, Maui, and the Big Island. And with each showing, we have conversations with people in the audience, and we learn more and more about Hawaii's confinement sites. We get more stories from families. There's a poster up here. I'm going to just share this with you. This is also a product of the Japanese Cultural Center's research. And this poster also hangs as part of the exhibit in the castle room next to us. But in this poster, you'll see names of people. And these names represent research of the Japanese Cultural Center. These are the names of every single internee living in Hawaii. And it's been a painstaking process to cull through books and documents to come up with a list of about 2,200 names of former internees of Japanese ancestry interned or confined in Hawaii. But you can take a look and see many people have been able to find their families, and those who know that their grandfather or great-grandfather was interned, we've been able to add their names to this list. So, Brian, I'm just wondering, as part of Densho now, I know Densho's been doing a lot of research and it has an incredible wealth of information, especially on oral histories. Tell us what Densho is doing to help preserve this chapter in history.
Sure. Densho, who I work for now, based in Seattle, but it's a purely online enterprise, and the idea is to just provide online archive of information about the Japanese American incarceration experience and also the larger World War II experience. It was inspired by the Showa Project in the 1990s, and so it starts with this large archive of oral histories, and we've since added photographs and documents. I'm working on a new encyclopedia that's part of that site. It's actually up now, and the idea is everything's free, usable by the public, aimed at educators and students, because as many of us who have children or grandchildren know, students today do almost all their research online. Which may or may not be a good thing, but it's important to migrate this information to that medium for that generation.
And Bill, what are you going to do with your story on the Japanese American evacuees? That is so unknown. What are you going to do?
I'm going to work with the Japanese Culture Center, of course.
Bill and I have been talking. We really have got to do this, tell this story, document this story, because you've done a lot of research on this issue, and it's so different from anything else, any other aspect of Japanese American internment history.
Yeah, well, I mean, similar to what Ryan and Brian, and the team here did. Again, that story really needs to be chronicled. I think we cannot underestimate the power of history and these kinds of experiences, whether it's in forums like these or in documentaries or in books, because if you don't chronicle these experiences, then we forget.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of learning and remembrance that is really key in the sustenance of human dignity and how we treat each other.
I agree. And for me, I also firmly believe it's for our future generations. I always think, like 100 years from now, what do I want my children's children, my great-great-great-grandchildren to know and remember? And I want them to know about the stories of the 442, 100th, and MIS. I want them to know about the stories of the Japanese American internees. Are there questions? Any questions from the audience? You can ask anything of these panelists, anything you wish. Yes, in the back.
Can you comment on the role that local people like Carole and Hawai'i had to do with the non-internment?
Can you comment on the role of some of the local leaders? And
You want to? Sure. I can add in too, but go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean that is part of the story. Locally, is that and another one of the big differences is that vis-a-vis the mainland, where basically the power structure there all favored removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans. In Hawaii, most of the leaders, non-military leaders, did not favor it, and many came to the defense of Japanese Americans, and I think that was a big factor in why you didn't have this mass incarceration here. I think best told in Tom Kaufman's documentary, The First Battle, that kind of tells that story of why that was. And a lot of it is also just that in Hawaii at the time, 37% of the population was Japanese American versus a fraction in California, and the people making decisions over there didn't, probably had never met a Japanese American in their lives, whereas people in power and making decisions here had close friends and worked very closely with that community. And as this gentleman mentioned, people like Hawai'i came strongly to the defense of Japanese Americans.
And Ryan, you want to add something?
Yes, it wasn't, and in addition to Hawai'i, there were people like Shigeo Yoshida, Nisei community leader, who was also part of the morale committees that we had here. So there was a movement of people here internally that also helped to stop the mass internment in Hawaii. And that's a whole nother subject that takes a whole nother hour to go into. It's a very, very interesting and complicated story.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I want to thank you for attending this morning, joining us for this morning's panel. If you're interested in more information about the Untold Story, please, you can check our website, www.jcch.com. Audrey Muramoto has a sign-in sheet if you're interested in getting more information on Honolulu. If you want to sign up for the DVD, once it's available in the summer, we will have the 1-hour documentary as well as this classroom version will be available all on one DVD. And if you're interested in purchasing it, please sign up and she'll take your information down and we'll contact you when it becomes available. Again, on behalf of the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii, on behalf of our panelists, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you for helping us keep this story in the public eye and for making sure that it does not become the forgotten story of Japanese in Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Before we all disperse, we do have a 1 o'clock storytelling with Alton Chung. But I just wanted to ask, are there any internees, maybe this came up earlier, but are there any in the audience?
Oh, I should have asked. Or
families of internees?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Hi.
And I know that we have a few World War II veterans, so I did want to acknowledge them in the audience. Mahalo. I wanted to just add one little thing too. I was mentioning to Carole before the presentation that I found my grandfather's photo in one of the Honolulu panels outside. And it actually is because Tatsuro Matsuo, he was a Japanese promoter and he was on the list and he was rounded up on December 7th. And my grandmother worked for John Burns as the relief secretary when he was in the police department. And so he personally, my family called him and he personally found my grandfather and vouched for him and they released him. So it was a wonderful opportunity to see his photo there in the exhibit. So I really want to thank all of you for really keeping this story alive, for bringing it out, for giving the community an opportunity to remember, to celebrate, and honor, recognize this chapter in our history. And so mahalo to all of you, and especially to JCCH. Mahalo. Mahalo for listening. If you have any questions or comments on this or other online audio programs, please visit us online at www.bishopmuseum.org. If you like us on Facebook, you'll be alerted when new programs are available. Ahui ho from the Bishop Museum.